Good evening, hello and welcome to this edition of the Startup Central. I'm Nayantara Rai, working from home. This is the only show of its kind on Indian television dedicated, of course, to startups, innovation, technology, disruption, entrepreneurship. Basically, if it falls under the gambit of the new economy, it's here every weekday at this time on your favorite channel, ET Now. Ladies and gentlemen, like all the stakeholders we feature on the show, Team Startup Central thrives on constructive criticism. We want to hear from you. Tell us how to improve this show, what's missing, what we should be adding, how we should be doing things differently. Keep writing into us. We love those emails. Our email address right on top, suc@etnow.tv. Right, let's get straight down to business. Now, thanks to coronavirus, obviously shared mobility has taken a big hit and is in the slow lane. There was a hue and cry before the outbreak of coronavirus how surge pricing by cab aggregators and shared mobility operators was anti-consumer. There was no algorithm, no arithmetic in figuring out when surge pricing would apply, how much is fair, and all of that. The government today has, in a move that is being seen as pro-consumer, tried to regulate this space by bringing in a cap for surge pricing. It's also spoken about unfair cancellation fees, and it's also put a lower ceiling on the kind of discounts that can be provided by cab aggregators. What is all these guidelines about? What's the likely impact? Let me go across to my colleague Karishma Asidani, who is joining us live from Hyderabad with this big story. Hi Karishma, we've seen the Ministry of Road and Transport come out with these guidelines, but as we all know, this will also be a state subject. So I would imagine these are model guidelines that states would have to adopt. Take us to the highlights.
It is a speedy bump for Ola and Uber as Indian government caps surge pricing and issues new guidelines for aggregators. In fact, Road Ministry released certain important guidelines today where major significant pointers are that drivers should receive 80% of fare applicable on each ride, while the rest 20% goes to the aggregators, and aggregators are allowed to charge 50% lower than the base fare, and also there's a maximum surge pricing cap of about 1.5% on the base fare. Two additional important guidelines are that in fact aggregator can also be suspended if there is a breach and failure to ensure safety of the rider and the driver. In fact, licenses are to be mandatory given by the states. Well, all these guidelines coming at this point could be a blow to aggregators since both Ola and Uber have suffered major losses due to the coronavirus pandemic. In fact, they have the largest market share, but their business came to a sudden complete halt due to the lockdown months of COVID-19.
So the guidelines that have been introduced that states should be putting in place as well as being seen as pro-consumer. Basically, cab aggregators will have an upper ceiling, it seems, as well as a lower ceiling. What's the reaction of all of this? Call it a coincidence, but Ola's founder, Bhavish Agarwal, was at a public event organized by the Confederation for Indian Industry, CII, today. He spoke, however, an hour before the Modi government came out with the guidelines for cab aggregators. Here he is talking about his journey, entrepreneurship skills, leadership skills, and the challenges before Ola.
In many countries, about more than 20-25% of the GDP is contributed by mobility. So I believe we are lucky that we are in one of the core industries of long-term value creation. And I believe not just that, mobility is also in a state right now where we will see a lot of value creation over the next 2-3 decades. If you look at the past 2-3 decades, a lot of value has been created in communications industries, with telecom, so your journey in telecom, or even if you look at e-commerce, if you look at, Apple and, electronic devices like mobile phones, etc. All of these are in some way linked to the communications industry and the communications revolution, internet and 3G, 4G, 5G. Now, that is one wave of value creation which has created trillions of dollars of value and will continue to do so. Mobility is a very, very different technology stack and a very different industry, which traditionally has created a lot of value. 70 years ago, the largest companies in the world were mobility companies, General Motors and, energy companies linked to mobility. Those were the world's largest companies. And, mobility innovations have led to so much progress in society, be it the steam engine or the railway locomotive or the plane or the jet engine, or modern manufacturing was built because of the invention of manufacturing by Ford, the assembly line and all of those things. So automotive mobility is a very large global industry. And if we have an ambition over the next 2-3 decades to ride this disruption in this industry, which is happening live, over the last 30-40 years, innovation in mobility kind of became more incremental.
Welcome back. You're watching Startup Central with me, Nayanthara Rai. Today, what we've seen is the central government come out with guidelines, and it's up to the states now to adopt for cab aggregators for those in the business of shared mobility. In a nutshell, what the government has done is put an upper cap for certain. It's also, in a way, introduced a lower ceiling for fares by clearly defining what should be the kind of discounting followed by the likes of Ola, Uber, and other taxi aggregators. 4-wheelers, 3-wheelers, and 2-wheelers. I'm going to be discussing this and more now with my next two guests, Kunal Khattar, partner at Advantage, as well as Mohit Dubey, the co-founder and CEO at Chalo. Thanks, guys, for joining us today on Startup Central. Kunal, let me come to you first. You really understand the shared mobility space. You do have in your portfolio companies that are in the business of shared mobility. This move is being seen as pro-consumer, and the way it has been drafted, what's going to be the likely impact? Because, as a consumer, I'm still not going to know, right, what the price is and whether the surge price has indeed been capped at 1.5 times or not.
I think it's a positive overall. I think till now, majority of companies in this space were operating without clear guidelines from the government. So in our opinion, having guidelines definitely help so that it's a level playing field for those who are large organizations who raise large amount of capital and those that are starting up with limited capital. So I think it's a plus point. I think from a customer point of view, I think, every organization recognizes that they're there for the customers. To say that, companies have unfair policies in an attempt to exploit customers, that's not really the case. I think what this does is it sets the right expectations, both for the customers as well as the startups, to be able to operate within these guidelines. And therefore, like I said, creates a level playing field for everyone.
Mohit, let me come across to you. You're a stakeholder, a founder in this space. What do you make of these guidelines? And of course, we don't know what the states are going to do. We finally have some kind of guidelines, but in this shape and size, what's your reaction?
Yeah, The guideline is good because you're trying to make aggregators a lot more accountable, ensure some kind of a customer safety, and also try to make the driver's life better. I love the fact, for example, how many times we have been in Ola and Uber and realized that a driver is trying to drive for 15 hours, 18 hours just to earn more money because they all live away from their home. Now it just mandates, for example, the driver can't really drive for more than 12 hours and they have mandatory 10 hours break, for example. So there are a lot of positive around the customer safety, women's safety, like a panic button, AIs 140, GPS, etc. What I think is still missing is something very specific. This talks about taxis and cabs, which to me is like a done and dusted sector, right? We have enough of guidelines and implemented by large companies like Ola and Uber, but very good for two-wheeler taxis, for example. But I wish we can get a lot more around buses, and there's so many more companies trying to aggregate public transport. This doesn't cover buses in details. Also, it doesn't really talk about a lot around the digital payments, for example, or how the buses permits could be made easier. Today, it's so difficult to run a bus in the city by taking a specific route permit, etc. But good to see, the electric vehicle, ethanol vehicles are exempted, especially two-wheelers, from a permit requirement. So these are all positives. And one of the other things that I really liked about it was that 80% of the fare has to go to the driver. Now, you can't really build a business with a 30%, 35, 40% gross take rate and take rates, right? That's what people have been trying to do. And driver really get squeezed in that process. I think these are all very positives from the guidelines.
Kunal, there's a very valid point that we just saw Mohit make, that buses, for example, have been left out. It's a good thing that it's been made easier as far as electric vehicles and all go with respect to permits. But if I could just come back to the arithmetic of it, you're the investor here, and now your arithmetic will have to change when you also decide to invest in companies in the business of shared mobility. 80% has to be shared with the driver. You have a cap of sorts in the amount of money that you can earn. So for the sector at large, which has been burnt by COVID-19, what is it going to mean?
I think 20% is a fair take rate, if you ask me, at scale. I think earlier, with smaller scale, of course, where your operating costs are higher, aggregators have a tendency to charge more. But I think from a customer's point of view, with 80% going to the vehicle or asset owner, because these are all, as you know, are aggregators, and therefore the assets are owned by them. I think what COVID did was it sort of accentuated the challenges and issues that these service providers or these asset owners were being faced with. So there has been a significant reduction in the kinds of incentives and the discounts and the cashbacks that aggregators have been offering, with a clear visibility to profitability focus, which was not there before. So I think companies themselves are far more disciplined now, and I think COVID-19 has accelerated that. And I think it's very important now to have a level playing field for all the players. And we're pretty confident that from a profitability standpoint, if you are running efficient organizations with optimized cost at every level, I think a 20% take rate should be sufficient for you to be able to create sustainable businesses, because India is it's a country of volumes. We talk about billions of people. There are about 600 million commutes that happen every day. So when you look at that kind of scale, it's important. And India is a very price-sensitive market with very, very price-sensitive customers. So there are low ticket prices, but you've got to be able to make that up with scale, which is why as a fund, we focus on public transportation as a very important sector. To Mohit's point, and buses are definitely the right form factor for a poor country like India.
Very quickly, because we're running out of time, Mohit, I'll give you the final answer, question that is, now it's going to be up to the states. But should there be a uniform cap when it comes to search pricing? I'll tell you how. I live in Delhi. I want to go to Gurgaon or I want to go to Noida. In the national capital region, the state is going to change, right? Isn't that going to complicate things?
By giving a fixed search pricing, like 1.5 times is the max?
Yes.
Your question is complicated. No, it makes it simpler, right? If you say the max is 1.5 times, the guidelines is a lot more customer friendly. You would have a little more comfort that it would be max 1.5 times. Otherwise, there are 10% people on who could pay possibly even 2x or 2.5x, right? But as Kunal said, right, we are a country of volume. we should really solve for what could really work for millions of Indians actually. And I think I'm glad that it says the max weather 1.5 times.
No, my question was that what if Delhi said 1.5 times, Uttar Pradesh hypothetically said 2 times, and Haryana, which has Gurgaon, said, 1 time. I don't know. I meant it from that perspective. But we're completely out of time. It's always a pleasure talking to both of you. Thanks so much for joining us. So for the first time ever, you're really seeing the government come out trying to regulate this space. Olas, Ubers, Bounce, Shuttle, Rapido, all of that. Let's see how it pans out. The ball is now in the state's court. Thanks a lot, ladies and gentlemen, for tuning into this edition of the Startup Central. Monday's a holiday. We'll see you again on Tuesday.